Today we learn how to increase our driving distance 100 feet quickly from the furthest throwing disc golfer in the world. Let's jump into it right now.
What's up, everybody? This is David Wiggins, and you're listening to the Chain Clankers podcast.
Welcome in, everybody, to the Chain Clankers Disc Golf Podcast, presented by Upper Park Disc Golf, the #1 destination to get a new disc golf bag. They've got some of the highest quality materials in the game, and they have some of the best bags that can fit any disc golfer's game right now. It doesn't matter if you're on the Pro Tour or if you're just starting today, they've got the best bag for you. Make sure you use promo code CLANKERS10 at checkout to save yourself 10% and support the brand. Today, we have the furthest throwing disc golfer of all time on the podcast. David Wiggins is joining us. David, how are we doing tonight, man? Super excited to talk to you.
Doing great. Yeah. Excited to be on the podcast.
Yeah. So let's just kind of jump right into how you first got into Frisbee throwing and disc sports. What does your background in disc golf kind of look like?
So when I was a little kid, about 4 years old, my parents moved into this neighborhood in North Carolina that happened to be pretty close to a disc golf course, pretty much walking distance. And my dad was exploring one day, found the course, and was like, hey, let me bring my little full of energy son around here so he can run out some energy, and we'll sling some frisbees in the meantime. And kind of spiraled from there. We started playing. I was 4 years old. I was a little kid, got in at a young age, luckily, and we stuck with it and upgraded our frisbees to discs eventually, and got involved with the local club. And it kind of took off from there once we started playing local doubles tournaments and bag tags, and kind of involved into going to regional events, and eventually played my first world championships when I was 9 years old.
Wow. That's incredible. 9 years old playing your first world championship. Were you more just thinking of like having fun at that point, or did you have that competitive? Did you have that dog in you at that point?
I've always been competitive as a little kid, but I mean, back then it was 100% just going out there and just having a good time, for sure. I mean, I definitely wanted to win, but I couldn't stay focused long enough to think about that all the time.
Yeah, I get that. So even at a young age, at 9 years old, were you still out throwing everybody, or did you have a little bit more competition maybe then?
Well, I set my first world distance record at 9 years old, an age protected one as well, and it was 343 feet. So as a little kid, I could still get it out there pretty good. Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. Is that just being an athlete, or have you always had really good form?
Combination.
Yeah.
I've always been athletic, and since I got started at such a young age, I had the time to develop pretty good form by the time I was even 9 years old. How crazy it is to think, but I had people giving me pointers at the local course, and my dad would take me out to the field to throw once he found out that I was in the running as far as how far I was throwing, to maybe potentially give that distance record a run. I think it was 277 feet when previous
Wow.
record when I did.
So you didn't just beat it. I mean, you absolutely crushed it.
Yeah, I don't quote me on that, but it was a pretty good margin.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. Did that just kind of fuel you even more? I mean, beating it by a lot. I mean, if I was in your shoes, I feel like I would just be amped. Like, I'm going to be the furthest thrower disc golfer of all time. And I mean,
I didn't even know what it meant. I just
really?
loved, and I knew even to this day, like I just love throwing the disc as far as I could possibly throw it. And just, I mean, I impress myself sometimes just watching the disc soar in the air. It's just such a cool feeling watching it fly like that. So that's always been like a driving motivation, just the pure enjoyment of seeing a disc fly like that. So
That's awesome. And I really feel like that's a good way to get better at disc golf. If you almost look at it like that, right? You're having fun, you have a passion for it. You just like seeing the discs fly. Whereas if you're like, okay, well, my nose weren't over my toes on this one, and I kind of lifted my nose angle a little bit, and I'm not a good disc golfer. Like, I feel like if you just have fun with it, you're leaning more on the side of being able to grow quicker without maybe having as much frustration. Did you kind of notice that in your own game? Like, did it just continually, almost like a snowball effect, to continue to get better and better as you're just having fun and growing up?
yeah, there was none of that like technical analysis of form for the most part back then. We're talking, I'm 27 now, so that was almost 20 years ago, which is crazy. But you have forums and YouTube channels and everything, doing form critique and everything. And back then, you really didn't see that as much. It was mainly just people going out there having a good time and throwing what they got. Coming up, there was no real form coach or anything like that I had. It was just go out, get the reps. What works, what doesn't, change it until it works, and kind of develop your own thing, because there's not a lot of people that have the 360 throw down out there in the world. I mean, there's a handful of people. So it was kind of experimental, but just kind of figured it out along the way.
Yeah. What were some of those things that you were experimenting with? Like, what were some things that were working for you early on?
I always had a big run up, and I always had a fast. And at the day, the faster that disc comes out of your hand, generally the further it's going to fly, as long as you have enough spin and the right angle and height. So I can attribute that to some of my success throwing distances, the speed I put into the disc with my body and not just my arm.
Is that part of the like 360 run up, or is there something that maybe outside of the specific run up that kind of helps generate that?
Oh yeah, I would say it's the 360 run up. I'm basically sprinting, and it's a very difficult athletic movement to do, especially with the spin. The more speed that you add to your run up, the harder it is to get the timing. So it's just something that's come after a lot of reps and years of perfecting it, really.
Yeah, that makes sense, because you hear a lot of people say slow, smooth as far, but I've even kind of tinkered with it in my own game, and I find that sometimes the more velocity you have going into the throw, you're probably going to be able to get more on it, especially if you're using it correctly and you're bracing with that front leg instead of falling forward. Is that like a timing obviously is important, but is that brace one of the more important factors to that in ensuring that that power is going through your body and it's not just lost momentum going forward?
Huge part of it, yeah. That brace and the plant is where the the power and the speed is being transferred from your body into your arm right there. And it really is an athletic movement, and it does put a good amount of strain on the body, especially the lower body. But it is definitely essential to throwing those crazy distances that you'll see the top pros throwing 500, 600 feet, 700 feet.
Yeah. That makes sense. And so, what are some things, if I'm a newer disc golfer getting into the sport and, I'm hearing bracing, like, could you maybe just give an overall, like, kind of what that means and what the proper brace would look like?
Yeah, I try to explain this at clinics and stuff, and really, you just want to think about your entire movement is just like a athletic, balanced movement with weight transfer at the right times. And you have to incorporate all those things. You want to stay loose. You want to have a little bit of bend in your joints so you can, have some spring to your step. You don't want to be rigid. You don't want to lock any part of your body, hands, arms, legs, and it just needs to be as fluid and as smooth as possible. And when you add the speed, that becomes difficult to incorporate the smoothness with the speed. So I can definitely say that if you just tried to go out there and throw as hard as you can, and you know that you're probably not going to have a smooth throw with good timing, you're not going to add any distance. So it's a gradual improvement to your form that you have to do to kind of see that improvement as you add the speed. And you might hurt yourself if you just go out there, full throttle, trying to rip it as hard as you can. That's what I tell people too. You gotta be cautious, especially when I was a kid, I could do whatever I wanted for the most part, and I wouldn't hurt myself because I was athletic. But as I get older, I stretch every time before I throw. I increase my power gradually, and yeah, just got to
Yeah.
be cautious about it for the longevity of your game and everything.
That is such a good shout. We talked to Disc Golf Strong and Seth Muncie at the Seeker Showcase a couple weeks ago, and he was echoing the exact same things during his clinic of, if you're going out to the course and just immediately throwing, you're going to hurt yourself, which will lead to you not being able to play as long, and you're probably going to hurt other parts of your game. I know I can attest to this myself. When I first kind of was getting back into disc golf in that 2020-ish range, and actually taking it seriously this time and going to the field, I remember grabbing all the distance drivers in my bags, and probably at the time didn't have a rating, but like for visualization, 7:45 at best, maybe at the point, and it shouldn't have had disc drivers in there, but just absolutely very first throw, tried to put everything I had into it, had a huge pop in my hip, and it took me a year and a half to be able to have any kind of resemblance of trust in my hip and it not to be hurting or sore. I think literally within the last 6 months, it's the first time I've played and it hasn't been sore. So
Good. Yeah.
that's just a big shout to everybody. Please make sure you are stretching. If you're going to be going hard, you have to take care of your body or you're going to end up hurt. And so moving on a little bit from that, the other thing that you had mentioned a little bit earlier was spin, getting spin on the disc. Can you kind of describe maybe a couple of ways to generate spin during the throw?
Yeah. So an interesting thing with spin is that we haven't completely, I guess, figured out the right or numbers as far as like spin speed ratio goes for the any level of thrower. I've heard that there's a device that can be used to put on the disc. I mean, I'm sure it's possible that we have the technology to track the revolutions of the disc now, but it just really hasn't been done. But it'd be cool to see the numbers, especially at the top level, because you'll hit the further throwing players with a radar gun, and we're throwing slightly different speeds, but the overall distance of the throw might not be that significant. So the correlation between speed and spin definitely impacts the distance of the throw. And if you think about it, the more spin that you have on it, the more stable, the less flex the disc is going to have because it has all this inertia going around, and it's going to keep it from losing energy as it flexes. And you'll see that when you break a throw down into slow motion, that the disc is kind of warping. So if you can save some of that in by putting more revolutions in it to stay flatter, you can probably improve some distance. As far as adding revolutions to your throw, that's really coming down to the hit, that final release of the throw where your wrist is really whipping through at the end. I try to keep my wrist and use it. People will describe whipping a towel or something like that. When I hit that brace, my arm is coming through. I've done my acceleration, rotate the end of my throw, and that's how I do it. And you'll see a lot of players doing that as far as trying to get the most spin and speed on the disc that they can.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I look at somebody like Drew Gibson. I can't remember. It was a wooded course, and just his buzz had stopped, 400 or 500 feet up the fairway, and yet was still spinning for 3 or 4 seconds on camera. While and I was like, wow, that's crazy. I don't think I've ever had one of my discs do that even once. And so I really think that you're hitting the nail on the head here, that the spin is super critical to being able to throw further. And that kind of makes sense. You want to have the whip and hit it like that. And so something that I was reading the article on your Instagram, the one that's in your link on Instagram, and just kind of looking at some of your form in slow motion and looking at the pictures. And something that I know personally I do a horrible job of, and maybe I'm not sure how to do it, is when you have your reach back, it almost looks like your disc is in like extreme anhyzer, or and maybe I'm just interpreting it wrong, because I know when I'm going through my reach back, I feel as though my disc is like flat to on hyzer. But the more form I've been watching, it's almost as if it's coming through at the very back point in an anhyzer position, but because then there's more lean over at the end and coming through, it comes through flat or with hyzer on it. Does that kind of make any sense? Like, is that something that can help get distance or control by having it more in that comfortable position instead of being super down and already having a hyzer angle at the very peak of your reach back?
Honestly, that's something that I do subconsciously. And like I said
Uh-huh.
previously, I developed my form off of really feel what worked for me and what didn't going through it. If you ask me right now, like you did, I don't know what the disc is doing when I'm fully reached back. I mean, I'm coming across, and it depends if I'm doing a 360 or not, because I feel like I tend to generate my power from more lower to up when I'm throwing a 360, just because of my release angle's going to be at a little higher trajectory. So I might change that angle of the disc a little bit. But what I found is being really conscious of my balance during my throw is very important. Like you'll see me continue to rotate after I throw with my 360, and I'm in a squatting position, almost low, and then bring my arms into my body and extend out, trying to increase my rotational acceleration and everything. So it just really boils down to what I found works for me, and what feels natural throughout my throw. And I guess wherever that position of the disc is when I'm all the way reached back I'm comfortable with it now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about nose angle and pull through. Uh, I guess the best question is, how are you able to keep the nose down while still throwing on an upward trajectory? Is that just having that thumb pressure on the end of the disc that's keeping the nose down? Is there something else in your throw that you're doing? What has
That's a
kind of
good
helped you?
question. Yeah. That's a question I've been asked a lot. And to be honest with you, I'm not keeping the nose down. It's still coming out a little nose up, but I'm just able to overcome that with the speed and the spin of the disc. I'm able to overpower it and getting it to turn over later in the flight. And it's just, I mean, when I was a kid watching people turn over discs, I was like mind blown. Like, this is crazy. How is somebody throwing a disc on hyzer way out there and it's turning over that late? I remember watching Double G. I'm a little bit younger than him, but when I was a junior, he could throw a lot further than me. And watching him flip a disc so late and he still does it, it's so impressive. But yeah, it really, it's not so much as keeping the nose down as it is working with the disc that you have to make it fly to its maximum potential. So the further throwers, we can very overstable and make them do that. But a more novice player should pick a disc that will favor their throwing abilities a little bit better.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Definitely should not be grabbing a Destroyer or a Raider or Zeus or anything super dummy, high speed and overstable. That kind of makes sense because that's something I'm glad you explained it the way you did because
Because
we've
if you're
been.
throwing, at the end of the day, if you're throwing the disc and it's going up, the nose has got to be up.
Yeah, it has
You know,
to.
it's just physics.
Yeah,
So
that's what's bothered me this whole time of doing this show is, people talk about nose down, nose down, nose down, but like at a certain point you run out of space to be able to have your disc fly if it's super nose down the whole way.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So from what I'm understanding is it's okay to have some nose up, and you really a good way of knowing if you were either too nose up or you didn't have enough spin is when you get it when it just goes up and just kind of falls out of the air. Whereas maybe you see some turn, or maybe it just continues and it has a nice hyzer finish instead of just falling out of the sky. That's more of a sign of, hey, that's okay. You had nose up. You have to if you want to throw further,
Hmm.
but you had some good spin there. Whereas if it just falls out of the air, you clearly didn't have enough spin.
Yeah. And I think a problem that a lot of players have, especially in level, is they're changing the trajectory of they're changing that angle as their progression of the throw moves forward. You really want to keep it on one plane the entire time when you're pulling the disc through. That's where you'll see somebody throwing disc for the first time and it swings up because they'll dip their arm down at the end. Your most athletic movement and your quickest movement is going to be that straight pull, whether it be slightly up or straight across. You want it to stay on that same plane the entire time you pull your arm through, because once you start adding in other movements and changing the angle of the nose later on in your throw, it's chances are not going to work out great.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I really feel like you're hitting some points that I have not heard in a long time, or I've never heard before, because that also makes sense. I've got a buddy who have been really trying to get in and play more. And that's literally exactly what he'll be doing. He's frustrated. He's not being able to throw it as far as us. And there's been times where he'll pull out a distance driver. I'm like, whoa, guy, not for you. This is no,
Simmer down.
sir. This is, I understand that we threw a distance driver. We probably shouldn't have done that. You definitely should not be doing that, my good man. And it's that also it'll start down and then it'll be up and then it'll somehow be down, or it'll be flat by the time that ends. It's not just a straight linear pull through. And that kind of makes me wonder, is there an optimal plane to pull through? Should you be down kind of going up? Should you be flat? Should you start it up higher? Like, where's maybe the best way or best angle to be pulling through?
I think that completely depends upon the player that you look at. You can see even at the top level, different players, throw their discs on. Like if you've seen Avery Jenkins throw, he's pretty high up on his chest throwing, and other players much lower. When I'm throwing distance, I'm definitely lower than that. It depends on your specific body geometry, what feels right for you, because everybody's shaped differently and is going to have inherently different form. But I can't say that there's one reach back or pull through that is ideal, but I can say that you should pick one pull or reach back that works for you and don't change it. Try to keep that same pull and reach back and use it as much as possible so that it's more muscle memory. You're changing your throw less. If you're throwing different reach backs, which I'm guilty of, but I also know that the less you change your form and the more constant your movement is, the more consistent and the more muscle memory you're going to have on that movement in the long run.
Yeah, that makes sense. Find what works for you, what feels the most comfortable, and just drill it, drill it, drill it. Are there any drills that you would recommend doing in the field, or any drills that you felt worked absolutely so much better than some other ones you've tried in the past?
Yeah, I like going out to the field, picking a target, putting my bag out there or something, and just throwing all my discs at it. Try to throw them, like I said, on the same pull through. I've been working with Coach Chris Taylor. He's been helping out some pros on tour, and that's a real big thing that he suggested as well. And if you look at Paul Macbeth, he uses a very consistent throw and reach back on across the board on his shots. I mean, you can look at him throwing a 300-foot shot or a 400-foot shot, and it looks like the same throw a lot of the time. He's not changing a whole lot, and that boils down to consistency and muscle memory. So if I can say something, it's get the reps in and dial in what your pullback and what your throw needs to be, and use that the majority of the time. There's going to be cases where you got to throw a crazy shot and throw at a weird angle. The less that you're changing your throw and the angle of your throw, the more consistent your movement's going to be. So use the disc to do the work instead of changing up your throw to do the work, because at the end of the day what that comes down to a lot of the time.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I feel like, just to kind of recap what we've been talking about for the last 20 minutes, I feel like some of the most important things to improving your distance and just overall improving your throw in general is you want to make sure you're bracing correctly, spinning kind of on that heel, not necessarily your toes, and making sure that momentum is going through your front leg. You want to make sure you're getting spin on the disc and you're really getting that whip effect with it. And then really the third one is you just have to find almost what's most comfortable for you and just rep it until it makes sense, and until you can get 1 and 2 in that list to be competent and improve, and eventually 3 will kind of find its way also.
Yeah, exactly. And when you move into the stage of playing tournaments, there's pressure and adrenaline on the line, and your body's going to default into the mode that it knows and that it has, the muscle memory and the reps in. So if you spend your time changing your form all the time, more so than you spend practicing one consistent type of throw, you're going to default to an erratic throw that you haven't practiced as much, when it boils down to it and the money's on the line, because, that's where you don't have the muscle memory of a consistent throw. So you've got to practice how you play
Yeah,
a lot of the
that
time too, at a
that
higher
makes
level.
sense. Would
Yeah.
you recommend?
And that's also, that is kind of a higher level thing, because when I was novice and stuff, I had to develop my throw. Everybody does, because at that level, when you're starting out, you probably don't have impeccable form. There's a lot that you have to work on. So It's a balance, definitely.
Yeah. So then going, I guess, more off of that adrenaline rush, I think something that happens to a lot of newer players, and it definitely still happens to pros as well, as the term the grip lock happens, and they just absolutely yank on the disc, overturn it. It's a cut roller. You'll definitely see this at your local C tier multiple times around.
Yeah.
So is grip lock real? Like, is that actually something real, or is it just, a bad
Grip
throw
lock's
and
real.
an
Yeah.
excuse? And
Grip lock's
so,
real.
so
It can
like,
come in different forms.
yeah, like what is it and how do you fix it?
You've got grip locks for putts. You've got grip locks for drives. You've got slips that turn into grip locks. You'll hear people call the putting grip lock a yip, where you just can't release the disc. And I've done it before on 10-foot putts and airball the basket. It's real. And you wouldn't do it practicing when there's not pressure on the line. It really does come down to some kind of a mental block that you have to get over. Same thing with drives. It can happen on drives. And, then sometimes I've had this happen. And I was playing the Brent Hambrick Memorial in Ohio when it was either an A tier or an NT. And I think I had Nico LaCastro, Jeremy Colling on my card. And I go to tee off and I slip. And I'm trying to hang on to the disc and I can't. And I
Oh
release it
no.
behind me, and the disc
No.
travels 100 feet behind the tee pad. And I just look at my card, and we just all burst out laughing. Like, yeah. I mean, I wasn't even embarrassed. It was just like,
Yeah.
what the heck just happened? But yeah, I mean, it happens. It wasn't a
Wow.
mental thing. That was just like a failed execution of holding on to the disc. But, a grip lock's a grip lock.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like earlier on in my game, I felt it a lot more driving. Lately, I feel like it's putting is where I feel it the most. Like, sure, I'll have
Yeah.
a bad drive. Maybe it'll be more the early release grip lock instead of the just absolutely yank cut roller one. But the putting one where it feels like a good putt and you just somehow spin completely around the basket. And I can't exactly remember which European girl it is. Innova. She's the one who spilt the tea on the ladies not wanting to play Waco or something like that difficult, where she just putts
Uh-huh.
at from a 10-footer and you're like, oh, wow. That actually happens to some of the best in the world. Also, it's not just a me thing. So, yeah,
Yeah.
that's very interesting. Well, okay, so I just got the alert. We've got about 10 minutes left. So, another point that I kind of want to hit on is, setting that distance world record. Can you just kind of take me through the moment of it happening, the preparation, and then it happening, and your immediate thoughts once it was confirmed?
Yeah. So I've thrown distance, I would consider, most of my life since I was like 8, 9 years old. And it was something that originally started out as my dad would take me over to this fitness complex, just basically a field with soccer fields and everything, football fields that were combined. So we had a lot of throwing area, but he'd take me there every winter when, there wasn't a whole lot of tournaments going on and where I could, play with my form without, tweaking it too bad during tournament season, which wasn't a big issue when I was young. But as I got older and started playing, advanced and pro, something that I didn't really want to do mid-season. But we would go there every winter and I'd work on my form. And when I was a kid, I'd throw on like 90 feet every winter. It was crazy. Just going out there consistently. It would be 2 to 3 times a week. You want a rest day in between throwing hard. And I'd work on my form, and there was always noticeable improvement over that 3-4 month period. So I ended up setting all the junior distance records, overall men's world record, at 16 years old. And at that time, me and Simon Lazat were pretty much battling throwing distance. He ended up breaking that record that I set, 836 feet, a couple years later. And we'd throw at distance competitions throughout the year, neck and neck. Then the year I ended up setting it at 1,108 feet. We just had this crazy day. I mean, it was blowing on 30 to 50 miles an hour throughout the day. And it was one of those things where I have thrown in the desert for years. I started going out there when I was 13, and it is, a lot of people like to discredit the wind, which there's no doubt that it helped it fly 1,108 feet. But it's also extremely difficult to throw in wind, as most players know. And when you're trying to hit a line, hit a 600-foot line perfectly in 20 miles an hour wind. Yeah, how many throws does it take to do that? It's very difficult to do. But nobody thought anybody was going to get a throw off that day that was going to be anything, because they just fall out of the sky generally in that wind. And when I got this shot off, I threw it as hard as I could. I hit the angle, and it just took off. And it had the perfect angle, and it looked like a speck of salt falling out of the air when it came down. I mean, it was just, I was legitimately like afraid to hear the number when they shot it. It was crazy. And everybody knew that it was gone, but nobody would have guessed it went that far. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was definitely like an awe moment. It was so cool.
What disc was it?
That was a Boss.
Nice.
Awesome. A Boss. Yeah.
Awesome. So I know we're almost out of time, but when it was flying, when it landed, what did you think it was? What do you think the distance was?
I mean, the thought of 1,000-foot was just incomprehensible,
Yeah.
So that was like, it was like a glitch. It was like, there's no way it went 1,000, but I think it just went 1,000 feet. And it didn't just go 1,000 feet; it went 1,100 feet.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It was crazy. Yeah.
Wow, that is absolutely insane.
It took a while for that to set in. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I said, I will be the first one to admit that the wind helped me, but will that throw be duplicated? I don't know, because one, the conditions were just, we didn't plan on having wind like that. And another thing about that day is we only had 2 other throwers have a further throw that day than any other day in the whole competition with minimal winds. So getting a throw off with that much wind was harder for most of the throwers than getting a throw off in minimal winds. Because you 15 throws a day. It's not like you get as many shots as you want. You get 3 sets of 5, and you get like a 5-minute window. I can't remember exactly what it is off the top of my head. So, even if you were just going out in the field and you had, 15 throws, it's hard to get the perfect one. But I connected with the perfect throw in the perfect conditions and had the perfect flight, and 1,108 feet was the result.
That is awesome. That is so cool to hear. And I mean, being in the middle of Kansas and Wichita, the wind is an issue. It feels weird to play without the wind, and you hit the nail on the head. Try hitting a 600-foot line with 20-mile-per-hour wind, and then just go ahead and double that and the wind. So cool. Such an amazing story. David, thank you for coming on, taking your time out of your evening, sitting down, talking with me and the Chain Clankers. Where can people continue to connect with you, learn more about your disc golf journey?
Yeah, social media. I'm on Instagram. Follow me there. I hope to be getting out, hitting some bigger events this year, doing some more clinics. Did a few with Double G last year. They went pretty well. So looking forward to getting back out there. I really made a little emergence back into the game in 2022. So looking forward to getting out there more this year in 2023.
Yeah, man. I'm super excited to see you back out there. I know watching you on coverage is going to be a ton of fun if we get the opportunity to do so. Can't thank you enough for coming on, and thank you guys for listening to this episode. Hopefully this helped, and you will be able to become a more powerful, accurate, further throwing disc golfer after this episode, and we will see you guys next week.